I just saw an incredible conglomeration of productions of Hamlet, and it really came home to me how incredibly frequently the play is performed.
I would love to have seen Keanu Reeves play Hamlet in Winnipeg that time when he was flown in.
I was like, okay, that's Hamlet.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shaking Up Shakespeare, the podcast where we acknowledge, investigate, and query Shakespeare's enduring presence on 21st century Canadian stages. I'm Marlis Schweitzer, one of the hosts of the series, along with Liam Lockhart-Rush and Hope van der Merwe. This podcast was written and recorded in Toronto, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. We're grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land. This is the second of 3 episodes that focus on the institutional and cultural structures that prop up Shakespeare in Canada. Our conversation would be incomplete without also reflecting on how Canadian ideas of Shakespeare continue to be influenced by British and American cultural products on stage, film, and television. Though seemingly less insidious than more overt or violent forms of imperialism, cultural imperialism involves the systemic promotion, dissemination, and privileging of culture associated with imperial or dominating powers. Those familiar with the history of Anglo-Canadian theatre know that the so-called alternative theatre movement of the 1970s was shaped by artists eager to break away from British and American cultural influence and seek something more distinctly Canadian. I hope you can hear my air quotes there. Of course, this resurgent form of nationalism came with its own issues, a subject perhaps for another podcast. Ultimately, despite efforts to move towards a post-colonial or even a decolonial future, contemporary Canadian society continues to be informed by its colonial past. You'll hear more about this in subsequent episodes. 21st century cultural imperialism explains why so many Canadians continue to revere Shakespeare or believe that his works are important and necessary. And again, we're not saying that they aren't important, but we're really interested in investigating how Canadians have come to believe so deeply in the value of Shakespeare. At the same time, repeated exposure to Shakespeare via film, TV, and stage has sharpened the critical perspective of many of the people we spoke with. There's no one way to talk about Shakespeare's influence on Canadian artists and the Canadian stage today. Our interviewees express love, fascination, confusion, anger, mistrust, disgust, and more. For a number of our interviewees, their knowledge and appreciation of Shakespeare was informed by time spent in England, whether they were traveling as tourists or visiting family, or pursuing an education where they had opportunities to see Shakespeare at recognized institutions such as the Royal Shakespeare Company, the Old Vic, or the Globe Theatre. Here's theatre critic and university professor Karen Fricker.
I guess my first meaningful encounter with his plays in performance was in trips to London, UK, which I did in the summer in between high school and university. I did the summer course at RADA, believe it or not. And I remember going to the Royal Shakespeare Company when they were at the Barbican. They would bring shows to the Barbican every year, which doesn't happen anymore, and seeing Juliet Stevenson in Measure for Measure. That is my first visceral memory of Shakespeare at scale and performed by somebody who's so masterful with that language and bringing it into her body, as is Juliet Stevenson.
Actress Sara Topham also has strong memories of her first Hamlet in London.
I was taken as a teenager to see it at the RSC in London, and I have very strong visual images of that one because it was a very visually strong production.
Professor Stephen Johnson's experience seeing Hamlet at the Young Vic remains with him today because of the production's powerful postmodern concept and his connection to the characterization of Hamlet.
It was done at the Young Vic in London by Michael Bogdanoff. It was a kind of a modern dress po-mo thing in the 90s. And I remember it with such affection because it was there was so much lightness of touch and humor in a play that you don't think has it. Hamlet came out wearing a Wittenberg University T-shirt, and he was a hippie he had glasses and hair exactly like mine at the time. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were a couple of preppy idiots who spent the entire intermission setting up for the play within a play. And they spent the whole time setting up the stage and ordering people around and doing all of this. It was all very funny, except when it wasn't. And I remember it so well because it paid no respect to the play, but paid complete respect to the play at the same time, in my opinion. I could identify with every single character in a different way than I had previously, and I was still moved at the end. Maybe more moved because, but Hamlet, as far as I could tell, was an undergraduate at the University of Guelph. It was the same guy.
For some of our interviewees, attending multiple productions of Shakespeare's plays in England led them to reassess their relationship to his work and ask new questions about why certain roles remain dominant. Here's Dalhousie professor Roberta Barker on Hamlet.
I've seen it many, many, many times. I had in particular the experience with Hamlet that I had with Shakespeare more broadly when I was living in Stratford-upon-Avon. And that was partially because of having the incredible privilege of living in England for 3 years when I was doing my PhD and living in Stratford in particular, but also being able to go to London and other places. I just saw an incredible conglomeration of productions of Hamlet. And it really came home to me how incredibly frequently the play is performed. And I started asking myself, no matter how much I love this play, why? Do we really need to see this many Hamlets?
Roberta also recalled a growing awareness that audiences in London viewed Shakespeare differently from audiences elsewhere.
I was once at a Royal Shakespeare Company production of Hamlet in the 90s with Alex Jennings, very, very, very great actor. Very interesting production by Matthew Warchus, where they cut some of the major soliloquies. And you could actually hear the audience gasp when it didn't come. What other text in the theater has that kind of reputation that many people in the audience, and sure, it was London, it's a very privileged English theater city, but still, what other play has that they cut to be or not to be? Oh my God. So there's this kind of sense in which I am really excited by directors and performers and theater artists who are I'm interested in why this play is so important, why it has this huge, huge profile in world theater history, why it's been used as a language to speak about so many things. But I also want to talk back to that. And I think that's actually something that can be done by a range of theater artists, but the perspectives that they bring with them and the lived experiences that they bring with them and the art that they bring with them and the craft and the training and the performance traditions that they come from are obviously going to open up those possibilities about the ways that they can talk back to the text. And for me, those are the most interesting things. And I would like to see more productions that don't just cast somebody different, but still do Hamlet, which is something that I've seen quite a lot of. And I've seen wonderful Hamlets by non-binary actors, female identifying actors, actors of color, trans actors, who bring incredible insight and new dimension. But I'm still worried about the fact that the idea is that somehow they all have the privilege of living up to this character. What makes that bloody character so great? Why not? I'm very excited about the works that have been why are we still listening to this guy talk? My teenage self would be so disgusted with me that I'm saying this. I used to be able to cry just to hear the words, the readiness is all, So again, I think that it's very much about positionality, what one perceives as innovative and cutting edge and important in productions of Hamlet. And yeah, I'm really aware of both the blinders that I had on when I really felt that there were sort of transformative things that could be done with the text of Hamlet, and the blinders that I have on right now when I'm kind of jaded and I'm oh yes, I've seen so many, it's all the same,
The summer Raoul Bhaneja spent studying at Shakespeare's Globe in London impressed upon him Shakespeare's capacity to reach multiple audiences. For more information on Raoul Bhaneja's Hamlet solo, please see our show notes. Often, it's the persona of the actor playing Hamlet that draws an audience to the theatre. Here's Stephen Johnson again.
I had this experience of going to the theatre in London where I was going to see Hamlet in a West End theatre. Big deal. It's going to be a traditional Hamlet. Yeah. And David Tennant, who at the time was Doctor Who,
Yes.
was going to be playing Hamlet. So naturally, it was sold out.
Mm-hmm.
And sold out by all sorts of people who'd never been to Shakespeare or possibly the theatre. And then he had to drop out because he was sick. And suddenly, all these tickets were available. And that's how I got to go and see the Hamlet. So I went to see the Hamlet with the understudy. And I went in and I sat there. And for the first 20 minutes of the play, I had absolutely no idea where Hamlet was on stage because he wasn't the star. There was this guy, I'm looking around, and the way it had been staged clearly was so that everybody was going to watch David Tennant somewhere and he would be identifiable wherever he was. But because he wasn't there, Hamlet was not identifiable. And I've always taken that away with me as being a radical reinterpretation of the play, even though it was unintended, because it's quite true that Hamlet just kind of appears after a while, and he's a forgotten individual at the side of the stage. And that's exactly who this guy was. Yeah. He was a forgotten individual at the side of the stage.
For those unable to travel to London to see British actors in person, touring productions offer access to British interpretations. Here's actor and director Allyson MacMackon recalling an early theatre-going experience in Toronto.
I also remember seeing the English Shakespeare Company in 1986. They came here with the whole War of the Roses series. I just started university, and I think I got a $20 ticket to see all three. And I sat there at the Royal Alex for the whole day, like at 9 o'clock in the morning.
And it was mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing to see that the language wasn't a barrier. They were making really hardcore political and design choices. Yeah, I'm sort of just vibrating thinking about this. And it's stuff that companies right now would not take the kind of dare that this company did in this production.
Film also offered access to Shakespeare, especially during the late 1980s and early 1990s, when British actor and director Kenneth Branagh offered a fresh new take on some of Shakespeare's most hallowed works, making Shakespeare seem exciting and even sexy again. Here's actor-director Jamie Robinson on seeing Branagh's 1996 film version of Hamlet.
Then I remember when Kenneth Branagh did his epic 4-hour, 5-hour version. I went to see that in the movie theaters, and this was shortly after I graduated from undergrad. And I loved it. I went, oh! And why? Because they did the whole thing. There was no cuts. It just had the whole breadth of it. And I thought it was quite marvelous. I went to see it again the next day. It was one of those things. Is it the perfect movie? Probably not. I don't think I've seen it since. But that was my first introduction to Hamlet. And it really was a test of like, can I see a Shakespeare show and really get it?
Seeing Branagh's Hamlet had a similar impact on University of Guelph professor Peter Kuling, who had limited access to Shakespeare in northern Saskatchewan.
I think my relationship to Shakespeare really started when I was aware that there were sort of plays I could access growing up in northern Saskatchewan with not much to read or see, or, finding plays and experiences and really loving scripts and really loving dialogue. But I didn't really have the outlet for, seeing it in performance per se. A few times at Shakespeare in the Saskatchewan, but not really full blown, big productions. So many of my early examples in Saskatchewan were film because I couldn't access stage. So it was, the Kenneth Branaugh Hamlet from 96 that becomes this foundational sort of like the total text minus one Horatio line, or something.
For Raoul Bhaneja, it was Branagh's 1989 film adaptation of Henry V that caught his attention. Branagh's ability to make Shakespeare accessible may explain why, in 1995, Hollywood celebrity and Canadian actor Keanu Reeves returned to Canada to play Hamlet in a production at the Manitoba Theatre Centre. This was 2 years after Reeves had played the role of Don Juan in Kenneth Branagh's adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing. In 1995, Keanu was an undisputed star, and the opening night in Winnipeg attracted international attention. Those lucky enough to get a ticket could purchase a t-shirt emblazoned with Keanu's face on the front and the words, "To thine own self be true," on the back. Here's what Brian D. Johnson, reporting for Maclean's magazine, had to say about Reeves' performance.
He did remember his lines. In fact, at times he recited them very quickly, like a schoolboy dying to get to the end. Perhaps it was just opening night nerves, but Reeves raced through some lines at such a clip that the sense was almost unintelligible. He whipped through the soliloquy, the signature tunes of Hamlet, as if they were air guitar solos locked into Shakespeare's iambic pentameter. He surfed from one consonant to the next, faster and faster. He rode the play as if it were wired to blow up below a certain speed.
Here, Johnson playfully nods at some of Keanu's most famous roles at the time. Roles including Bill from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Johnny Utah from Point Break, and of course, Jack in Speed. At the same time, he acknowledges Keanu's acting limitations. Johnson nevertheless praised Keanu for his physicality and comic timing. Even when his delivery was lacking, he wrote, There was something intriguing about his presence, the ingenuous lift to his voice, the blank sense of disconnection that he projects, and his valiant efforts to overcome it. Those qualities make him a more suitable casting choice for Hamlet than he might at first seem. And Keanu, in his now widely recognized Keanu fashion, endeared himself to the Winnipeg community, who found him, in Johnson's words, friendly, humble, accessible, hardworking. Keanu even insisted on being paid at the same rate as the other actors, refusing to be treated differently as a celebrity. Nevertheless, the MTC's decision to take such a big swing in casting Reeves as Hamlet remains a textbook example of the impact of cultural imperialism and celebrity, one that our interviewees continued to reflect upon.
I would love to have seen Keanu Reeves play Hamlet in Winnipeg, that time when he was flown in. It wouldn't have been a good production. I love the guy, but he's his own meme. You're casting not for the interpretation of the thing, of the play. You're casting for some other purpose. And I'd actually think the more radical approach is to change the setting, change the costuming, change the,
UVic professor Erin Kelly notes how the Hollywood or celebrity model of producing Shakespeare, particularly Hamlet, continues to impact casting decisions at smaller theater companies.
I just feel like there's just a lot of productions of Hamlet that start with the idea that, like, this is a star role, and whether it's our longtime lead male where it's his turn, or we're going to get the nice celebrity that everybody wants to pay to come and see do this role. There's all sorts of stuff invested at that point, making Hamlet the star and making Hamlet likable and admirable.
So the Keanu Reeves model of Hamlet, I don't know if you heard of that one in Winnipeg.
I did. I heard it was in Winnipeg, and I heard he wasn't bad.
Yeah, tracing the history of Keanu's career, it comes at a really fascinating moment, sort of post some of his early celebrity. He's looking around to kind of go, what do I do now? Who am I? What can I do? Can I do Hamlet? And I think the invitation came and he was like, okay, why not?
Canadian stage, film, and television actor Paul Gross took up similar questions in season 1 of his hit series Slings and Arrows, which premiered in 2003. Not on the CBC as you might expect, though today you can find it there on CBC Gem, but rather on Canada's Movie Central and the Movie Network channels. Set at the fictional New Burbage Theatre Festival, clearly modeled on the Stratford Festival, Gross plays a former actor turned indie director named Jeffrey Tennant, who must contend with the nerves and inexperience of a young Hollywood actor named Jack. And it's worth noting that Jack is the name of Keanu Reeves' character in Speed. In this case, the role of Hamlet in Slings and Arrows was played by a young Luke Kirby, now an Emmy Award-winning actor. And if you've seen Slings and Arrows, you might also recall that it features a very young Rachel McAdams. Here is Professor Peter Parolin recalling Slings and Arrows.
I mean, I always remember from Slings and Arrows, Paul Gross directing this young American actor, I think it was a young American actor in the series, on how to play through Hamlet. And he's got this one wonderful scene where he goes, it's just six soliloquies. And he does this kind of read of how the soliloquies drive you through the narrative. That's one way of approaching it, but it's a pretty good way to think, oh, there is a skeleton here through the soliloquies, even though, of course, early textual history will say that the soliloquies don't always show up in the same form or the same place in relation to each other.
What made Gross's exploration of Hamlet in Slings and Arrows so compelling for Parolin and others was that Gross had played the role of Hamlet himself at the Stratford Festival in the year 2000.
Hamlet is very physical, and the challenge is how do you externalize this like really rich journey that the character is going on internally. And I thought Paul Gross, in my memory, did a very good job with that. I just have an image of of sort of almost like King Lear's image of the mother, the wandering womb coming up and getting him. And I just have images of Paul Gross doing this with his fingers, like he was so intense. So you just felt this rising emotion. And he was charismatic. The production was, was staged well. There were good actors in that production. But Paul himself is what I really remember.
Interestingly, this past year, Paul Gross returned to the Stratford Festival, playing King Lear in a production directed by Kimberly Ramprasad. While other Hollywood productions of Hamlet are starting to fade from view, Mel Gibson's 1990 film was an initiating moment for some. Here's actor-director Jamie Robinson again.
Oh, you just brought back a memory. I went with some high school friends. We went to see Mel Gibson in Hamlet. And I was really excited because I was so upset that I could never understand Shakespeare. I said, I'm going to go see Hamlet. I don't know it, with Mel Gibson, and I'm going to get it. And I saw it, and I got it. It was Hollywoodish, and it was pretty digestible. But it wasn't that exciting to me. I was like, okay, that's Hamlet.
Actor Sturla Alsväg also recalls seeing Gibson's Hamlet, though he needed a bit of help from interviewer Jeff Ho to remember his name.
I don't know how many productions of Hamlet I actually seen. What's his name? From Braveheart in the movie and stuff.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Mel Gibson?
Mel Gibson, yeah.
He did play a Hamlet, right?
He
did.
Yeah.
But Professor Liz Pentland is less impressed with Gibson's version.
I don't teach Mel Gibson. I mean, I think there are far more provocative films of Hamlet that really get me excited and that students have a lot to say about or can find really compelling.
Pentland's comments remind us of the critical role teachers and professors play as tastemakers. A syllabus that steers a class away from Mel Gibson and towards the work of an innovative new director can radically reshape how Shakespeare is perceived. At the same time, for those who don't have access to formal university courses or who live outside theater centers, film and television productions of Shakespeare, such as the recent Netflix adaptation of The Tragedy of Macbeth starring Denzel Washington, continue to spread the gospel of Shakespeare. In our next episode, we consider how the enduring popularity of Shakespeare in the Park and other forms of outdoor Shakespeare continue to influence the way Canadians see, hear, and experience Shakespeare.
Shaking Up Shakespeare!
This podcast is part of Resetting the Stage, a 5-year project that seeks to situate debates about theatrical representation and the politics of casting in Canada within a broad historical context, advancing dialogue with directors, playwrights, actors, educators, students, and other creators who are actively transforming professional Canadian theatre and university-level theatre training. For more information on other aspects of the project, please visit castingcanadiantheatre.ca. Interviews for this podcast were conducted by Marlis Schweitzer, Jeff Ho, Liam Lockhart-Rush, and Hope van der Merwe. All episodes written and edited by Marlis, Liam, and Hope, with dramaturgical input from Jeff. Sound mixing and levels by Maddie Batista. ASL translation by Dawn Janney Burley. Original music by Faith Andrew. Special thanks to Charles Ketchaba and Will Innes at Fixed Point for support with training, development, audio equipment, and software. Shaking Up Shakespeare benefits from the following support: a Connections Grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, an exchange grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, funding from the York Research Chair, and a York Research Support Grant. Many thanks to the wonderful people we've interviewed for sharing their important insights and perspectives. We could not have done this without you. Special thanks to our early collaborator, Why Not Theatre. And at York University, thanks to Dean Sarah Beijing, Mary Pecchia, Amy Mitchell, and many colleagues, students, and friends. Thanks for listening to Shaking Up Shakespeare.